Okay, hello everybody. So, I don't have a ton of time today. I got about an hour. So, I had a couple people on Twitter mention that my landing page for my Vue course that I'm working on is using jQuery instead of Vue for this form, which is true and unfortunate because it's not really my decision. It's just I pull in the JavaScript library given to me by my email provider, which is ConvertKit, and that goes and fetches jQuery and does a bunch of stuff. So I think they have a valid point. I think it's pretty shitty for this to be using jQuery, even though it's sort of out of my hands. And ConvertKit doesn't really give you a lot of information about sort of sending information to their endpoints on your own. So what I thought we would do is sort of reverse engineer how their widget is sort of working, and rebuild it with Vue, and if we have time, maybe get to some interesting things. Because there's actually two sign-up forms on this page. There's one here, and there used to be one down here, but I've done a little bit of work to disable certain things. So we'll get it working anyways. What I'd like to be able to do is basically have it so if you sign up for one of them, the other one disappears, and maybe implement this using like a renderless component so that we can render both layouts using two instances of the same component. So I have done no preparation for this. I just was going to work on it, and I thought it would be fun to just sort of stream it on the fly. So let's just give it a shot and see where we get. So I've started doing a little bit of prep work. I've pulled in a couple libraries here, which I'll probably build these down into my own JavaScript file eventually. But for now, I think it's fine for us to just sort of work on this stuff directly in the browser, kind of pulling this stuff in from CDN. So we got Axios to make an AJAX request because it's kind of the nicest library I've used for that. QS, which Axios needs if you want to send stuff as regular sort of form data instead of JSON. And Vue. So up here in this template, you can see is where the form is. Now, I started working on this, like sort of sketching out how it was going to work. So we've got like a sign up form component, but I haven't actually done anything yet. I decided right away, you know what, I should just stream this. So you can see by default, what would happen is there'd be like a script tag right up here that would load ConvertKit stuff and kind of wire everything up and make it work. So what we're going to do is try and re-implement that stuff with Vue. So first things first, why don't we just kind of get this rendering and stuff like that and see if we can get like the dev tools sort of showing us the stuff that we want. Let's make sure we don't pull in the minified version of Vue. I think if we pull in the non-minified one, it'll have the dev stuff enabled. So we got like a Vue instance wired up here. Now, this markdown file is what contains the other form that we're going to be looking at afterwards, but let's just see what's going on right now, what sort of errors and stuff we're dealing with, because we've sort of made a mess of this stuff. Okay, so unknown custom element, which is fine. So let's go ahead and register that. So we're just going to do this as sort of just a plain old script tag down here for now. So we'll register component, sign up form. I'll just make that an object, and let's just see how far that gets us here. Fail to mount component, template, or render function not defined. Okay, so let's give it a template, but let's just make it an empty string, because at first I think what I want to do to kind of get this working quickly is use an inline template, then refactor from an inline template to a renderless component eventually. Okay, so let's see what we get here. So it looks like we still have an error about compiling the template, and I'm wondering if inline template components must have exactly one child element. Okay, perfect. So let's make sure that we just wrap all this in like one extra div just to satisfy that for now. And we'll do the same thing over in this other version here. So throw another wrapper div. Again, eventually we'll be able to simplify this a little bit, but let's just try and get it working first. Okay, so things are working, except, if we click some of this stuff, it's just going to take us to ConvertKit's page and submit it as like a real form. So if you head over to the actual page, let's just make a network request here. I'll just sign up for my own thing. We'll just use a fake email address so that everyone knows my email address. We'll just do adam@testdrivenlaravel.com. My email address isn't hard to find. Okay, so let's just kind of see what requests they make and figure out how we're going to need to sort of reverse engineer it. So it looks like this is the endpoint that we're going to hit. And that's sort of dynamically created from this form ID, which I'm sort of storing up here in the markdown file, and just kind of plugging that into this URL format. So right now we're passing this through as a prop into this component. We're not accepting it as a prop though. And if we go ahead and take a look at this, I think we'll see that it does in fact have like the correct stuff there in the form. So we do have that number there. So why don't, as our first step, we just try and get some of this stuff out of kind of like server rendered land and into client-side rendered land. So let's start by adding some props here. So we'll add a prop for the ConvertKit ID. And then up here where we're getting it from the page, and this is using the Jigsaw static site generator. So we're using Blade, the Laravel's templating language, to build stuff on the server side, and that's compiled into static HTML. So here, let's just change this to a binding, and we'll use like a template string here. And then if we throw a $sign here and change this from page ConvertKit ID to just ConvertKit ID in camel case, I think this will get us one step closer to things sort of working. Okay, so it looks like that is still what we expect. Okay, so some things here we don't really need. If you go ahead and look at this request, you can see it sends two things. It sends the form ID and the email. So we just need to make sure we build that object when we submit this stuff via Axios. So let's just go through and clean up some stuff that, like some cruft that we don't actually need. So this data remote true thing, that's like some sort of Rails thing that it's adding. What else do we got here? This display none thing, we're going to want to change that to use like a vShow sort of setup. This hidden input, we don't have to worry about this one, so we can get rid of that. These IDs I'm actually going to get rid of, because one of the annoying problems that kind of pushed me down this path as well is that their JavaScript is expecting you to have this ID on your form. So if you want to have two forms on your page, you have to have two IDs, which is invalid markup, which is, the browsers will still render it and things will still work, but kind of bugs me. So we'll leave this action here. I think we can get rid of basically all these annoying IDs. It'll be nice to get this down to something really nice and clean. Any other IDs to get rid of here? This stuff can stay server rendered for now. I think that's okay. We don't need the ID on this input, and we probably aren't even going to need this input, but I just want to keep it here as a reminder that we're going to have to send that data along. Okay, so let's just make sure things are still rendering. Still seems okay. Wrong page. Okay, still seems good. So let's go ahead and add a method to this component to submit the form. So we'll add a submit method here that's going to take an event. And why don't we just console log the event? And then up here, we'll go ahead and add a @submit.prevent, so we prevent the default, and we'll call submit. And we should still get the event hopefully here. Let's just open up the console and kind of just see what happens when we click this. Okay, so we get an event coming through. Are we going to be able to get the action from the event, I wonder? So we can go e.target.action. That seems cool. So that way we don't have to like build this dynamically. Like you could make this like a converted or a computed property, but at that point there's no point in even binding it as an action because we can just use it inside our JavaScript. So I think if we're going to listen for a form submission, it makes sense to put the action on the form and then just fetch it off the form. So it feels like a little bit more idiomatic HTML and not just like hijacking a form that doesn't actually submit anywhere. And, it just feels more correct to me. So let's log e.target.action and make sure that we can actually see that. Okay, so we get the address that we want to submit it to. So we can actually probably destructure that out of here if we really wanted to. We can say e target action. And then I also don't know what browser support is like for this stuff because I use Babel for everything. So it'll be kind of interesting to see. Cannot destructure property target of undefined or null. Interesting. Oh, I guess actually we don't need the E part. We can just do target action. Yeah, okay, that's cool. It's kind of slick. Okay, so if we go ahead and look here again, we can see that we need to, I guess I'll just submit the old form again, whatever. Probably get blacklisted at some point. So we have to make a post request, sending along the ID and the email. So we're going to want to do something like axios.post to action, passing along some params, right? So let's check out the Axios documentation and see how we need to do this stuff. So if you look for QS on here, I think we can find it. Okay, so qs.stringify this stuff. So one thing I'm going to try actually is just make sure that this stuff is loading in the browser because I'm using everything from CDN and all this stuff is sort of meant to be used in sort of like a building environment, where you have Babel and stuff like that. So it's hard to know if all these things are designed to actually export their main export properly to the window object. So why don't we just do this and see QS is not defined. So that was kind of my fear. Okay, so we loaded in QS. Now, maybe we can go take a quick peek at this on unpackage. Let's see, window. What do they do with the window? Okay, if window is undefined, G equals window, and then they do G dot. Do they ever assign anything to G? G.QS. Oh, it's QS capital Q. Interesting. QS. Yay, okay. So if we say qs.stringify bar 123, perfect. So that converts it to form params for us like we would expect. Yeah, IE11 doesn't support it. Probably a bunch of other stuff doesn't support destructuring, but that's okay. I'm going to move this to a build step eventually. So as long as it works in Chrome while we're just kind of hacking it out, I think that's cool. Okay, so we can use QS with a capital Q to sort of build up this thing that we want to send. So why don't we console log the action and then also console log QS dot, what was it? QS dot string? Stringify? QS dot stringify. And then the object that we're going to want to send, which is really just ID is ConvertKit ID, this dot ConvertKit ID, that prop. And then the email is going to be this dot email. And we're going to need to actually make sure we have like a V model binding set up for that so that we can actually get it. So let's get rid of this hidden input now, since we don't actually need it, because we're going to be sending it along via Axios. And I'm just going to stick this V model binding right at the beginning here. V model equals email. So let's make sure we add some data here. So we're going to have a function that returns an object. And that object is going to have email set to an empty string to start. So let's just comment that out and kind of play around with this for a second. So we get ID, email equals blank, put in an email at whatever. Yeah, okay, so that seems to be like working as far as I can tell. Okay, so we're going to want to post that to ConvertKit. All right, so let's uncomment this. This is going to be the object that we build out here. And we'll have to do some stuff with like loading states and stuff like that too. So I think the first step is we'll try and actually send this, and then on my other computer, I'll make sure that it actually goes in to ConvertKit, so I don't, rudely share a bunch of people's emails or private information or anything by mistake. So let me just get that open on my other machine over here so I can check that that's actually coming in. Okay, so let's go. All right, perfect. Okay, we'll refresh this. We'll watch the network tab. Okay, it says that it went through. If I go and refresh over here, you know what? I'm probably already subscribed. So let's say stream test 1. Yep, it came through. Perfect. Okay, so that's working. So that's one step in the right direction. So I think what we want to do now is handle like the loading states and stuff like that. So if you check out what happened here, I'll just keep subscribing over and over again. You'll see we get like the button changes to say working ... So I think what we want to do is add a state to data here where we have like a working false. So we'll start by saying, we're not actually doing any work. When we go to submit, maybe we'll say this .working equals true. And Axios uses like a promise-based API, right? So .then we get the response, and we can catch stuff too. Okay, so .then we'll get a response back, which we probably aren't going to use. As long as we know it's successful, really all we care to do is say this .working equals false. We're going to want to do that in the catch situation too, but let's not worry about it yet. And then up here, why don't we conditionally render different button text here. So to make that easy, I'm going to wrap these in spans that basically just do nothing other than make it easy for us to hide and show things. So we'll say v show equals, we'll use vif. Doesn't really make a difference in this case, but if you use vshow, the elements are still going to be rendered, and that can sometimes cause problems if you're doing stuff with CSS like child selectors and stuff, or maybe if you wanted to style the last span or the first span in a button. If you have a hidden one there, even though it has display none, it's still going to affect styling stuff. So I try to be careful about if it makes sense to use vshow or vif. I mean, in this case, it really doesn't matter, but vshow is a little bit more performant for things that are going to be toggling a lot, but vif is going to be fine in this case too. And it's nice because we can just say velse here. So it just reads a little bit nicer than saying vshow working, vshow not working. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, so adam.wathen plus stream test2 gmail.com. Okay, so it switched to working, which was cool. But I don't think it was disabled. So that's like probably another thing that we need to consider. So why don't we drop this down so we can add like another binding here. And let's just say this button should be disabled if we're doing work, so you can't click it multiple times. And let's like be explicit that this is a submit button for the form that it's in. That's the default, but most of the time when you're making buttons in like JavaScript applications, they're actually not submit buttons. So you always have button type button. So I think since this is actually a submit button, we should be explicit about that. Okay, so that should be good. Let's think about this situation now. So once it's done, we don't want it to just go back to showing this, right? That's lame. We're going to want it to actually show this section here. So we're going to need to track some more state for that. So let's do like subscribed, maybe. We'll default that to false. We'll set subscribed equals true first, even though it doesn't matter because it's going to batch these updates. And then working equals false. So then up here, let's get rid of this annoying ID. Let's get rid of this display none. And we'll just say vshow subscribed. And this form will be shown if we're not subscribed. And this is going to show on error, so we can handle that next in sort of our catch state. Plus stream test1 gmail.com. Cool. So ConvertKit has like a nice fade in and fade out effect that they use, which, you know, for the actual usability of the site doesn't really matter. I'd rather focus on some of just getting things to work and maybe doing some of these more interesting component design refactorings. But maybe that's like a little bit of polish that we can add later. Okay, so why don't we try something else here? I'm going to change this from input type email to just text, so the browser doesn't give me crap about not using an actual email. And that way we can kind of simulate error situations. That's interesting that it came back as okay. So even though I didn't submit a real email address, it came back as okay. What if we submit nothing? Still comes back as okay. Interesting. I feel like that doesn't happen over here. Now, is that because the response? Oh my God, kill me. Okay. So we're getting back a 200 response that everything was fine. However, the status is not acceptable. So that's disappointing. Just yet another reason why maybe it's nice to be implementing this ourselves. Let's change this to text and try and submit like a non-email. I just want to see if the status, if there's two different types of statuses. Yep. Okay. So we at least have error and not acceptable to worry about. And again, none of this stuff is documented because I don't think they really expect you to be rebuilding this stuff yourself. So let's go ahead and try and account for these situations. Really sad. Okay, so we've got not acceptable or error. So two things that we should do. We should probably catch any errors. I don't really care what happens other than that we won't be working anymore. And we might want to say like this.error equals true. And do that up here as well. Okay, or sorry, false. So let's go ahead and only show this if there's an error. Okay, so things are looking normal. If we just go and toggle this little bit of state, hopefully we should be able to see, you know, things are showing as expected. So one other thing that we should probably do is as soon as you try to submit, maybe clear out the error. Since there's not an error, until it actually comes back. And yeah, so I think that's decent. Let's worry about this gruesome problem of handling this not acceptable or error status. So let's just console.log this response so we can kind of see exactly how it's structured. I can't remember if Axios gives you like a response object that you have to get like the data from or not. So it's easier to just watch what happens and figure out how we need to extract it. Okay, so it's going to be response, data, status. Okay, so let's just extract that maybe. So we'll get the data, status, and I guess we're just going to have to do some gross if statement. If status, actually there's two statuses, right? So we can do if error not acceptable dot includes status. So if the status is in that list, then we can just say this dot working. You know what? Since updates are batched, let's do this first, since that's always going to be the case. We can just say this dot error equals true, and then we could do like an early return here. But since we're not returning anything, I kind of would rather just use an else statement, which is not really my favorite, but you know, it'll work. Okay, let's run this. Something went wrong, something went wrong, something went wrong. Okay, empty, something went wrong, something went wrong. Real email address, stream3@gmail.com. Working. Okay. Not bad, not bad. So I think that's kind of like the bulk of getting that thing to work. Now we have another form down here that doesn't do anything right now, just submits a real form submission. And this needs to sort of work the same way. So I have about half an hour left before I have to get ready for some other stuff. But why don't we start by making the other one an inline template as well, and just kind of like refactoring it, and then looking for opportunities to extract things and simplify. Okay. So this is not going to be page ConvertKit ID anymore, since this form is like embedded in the markdown, which I tried to make this like a generalized coming soon template that I could reuse, and kind of failed at it because I was rushing to get it done at the end of the day. So all good though. So we'll just pass that in hard coded, and we can do a lot of the same sort of cleanup that we were doing on the other form. So let's get rid of this. This action, we can just kind of copy how that works here. In fact, we can basically copy this whole opening form tag. And let's turn off wrapping so we can actually see this. Okay. All right, so let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. Get rid of this. IDs. See ya. Make this a type button again. We need a V model on the input, right? Equals email. We want to disable the button. And I think like we're actually going to want to do like the same sort of working tracking stuff too. So let's just copy this whole thing up to like the end of this line. Tailwind CSS, man. So many classes. What a piece of junk. And I did some pretty weird pasting there, but it's fine. And this isn't going to be page button text anymore. We'll just have to hard code, keep me updated in there. Now we don't need an ID here, and we don't need this style tag. We're going to want to do the same thing that we were doing down here, which is just vshow that if there's an error. Oh, submit. Thank you. Okay, let's just see if this is working. Oh, we got to add a vif to this one. Vif equals subscribed. Okay. So if this is working, then we can like start doing more interesting things finally. Okay, it's fine. I might even want to style this differently or whatever. Okay, so interesting things that I want to do. Interesting thing number one is I want these forms to sort of be synchronized. So when someone submits this one, I want this one to go away completely. Now, if someone submits this one, I don't really know what I want to happen up here. I guess I could like remove this whole call to action. or I could just go to the success message. Why don't we start by getting the success messages to be synchronized? So I think the correct way to do that is to move subscribed from being a local state in the component to being a prop that's synchronized with the parent instance. So let's do that by adding a data property that has subscribed false on the actual Vue instance itself. And we'll add a subscribed prop here. Not props, what the hell am I doing? Subscribed. And now up here, where we're passing in the ConvertKit ID as a prop, let's also pass in subscribed as a prop. So if we say subscribed equals subscribed, that's going to pass it through from the parent. Okay? Let's get rid of the data property here. And instead of setting this.subscribed equals true here, we're going to want to emit an event. This.emit $emit subscribed event, and we don't actually have to pass anything. Yeah, we could do .sync, but I think it's kind of interesting to show how it works behind the scenes, then refactor to sync if we want. Okay, so we're just going to try and get the first component working, and then we'll move on. Okay. So we're going to submit the subscribed event. And now up here, we're going to want to listen for a subscribed event. And in the subscribed event, we can say subscribed equals true. Something like that. Let's see if we didn't make any silly mistakes. Did make a silly mistake. Property or method subscribed is not defined on the instance, but referenced during render. Oh, that's because of this component down here. So why don't we just comment this out for a second? Okay, it's still happening on this one. Okay, property or method subscribed is not defined on the instance, but referenced during render. I misspelled it. That is the best thing that could have happened here. Subscribed. Those ones are correct. Suscribed. Perfect. Thank you, Christopher Pitt, hero of the day. Okay, cool. It worked. Okay. So let's refactor this one to work the same way. Now, the only thing we really need to do here is add the, make sure that we emit that event. Sorry, make sure that we add the event listener. Because otherwise it's the same, right? It's the same component. So, and actually, what am I doing? That's the wrong spot. Has to go on the root component. So up here, and we have to make sure that we pass down that prop too. So subscribed is going to be subscribed from the root instance. Okay, refreshing. So right now we've got this form and this form both showing. So let's subscribe me, working, success. This one didn't update. Interesting. Let's check our dev tools. So subscribed is true. Subscribed true. Subscribed undefined. Did I spell something wrong again? Oh my goodness. I did. Now let's try it again. Always with the typos. Okay, they're synchronized now, so that's cool. Neat. Now, I think for this form, let's think how we'd actually want this to work. So I think the state tracking is going to be challenging. It's the same component with different templates. I'd like to actually move this text into this template because what I think I want is if someone signs up with this form, I think I want this to completely disappear. But if someone signs up with this form, I want it to show the text saying, that they're subscribed. So I think it's a little bit tricky to make this work. The only way that I can think to do it off the top of my head is you almost need like two pieces of state, if that makes sense. It's almost like we need to keep track of, was this the component that was subscribed to, if that makes sense. So we'll have like an overall subscribed prop. And now I'm trying to think like what you would call the other one. So there's like two pieces of data. There's like, did they subscribe anywhere? And then there's like, did they subscribe through this instance? So I'm trying to think like, how would you track that? Like the naive way that's coming to my mind is just like making a new piece of data, like subscribed locally, it starts as false. And here where we emit the subscribed event, just also saying like this dot subscribed locally equals true. So this is fine, I think. But it kind of feels like kind of weak. I kind of feel like maybe there's like a better way to think about this, or like a better mental model for it. Yeah, see what Chris is saying, you could have call the prop subscribed by and store a string type. I sort of thought about that. Like, could we just pass a reference to the element, to like the component that where the subscription happened from, if that makes sense, and it could just check like if this equals this dot subscribed by or whatever. But let's just try it using this two pieces of local state for now. Okay, so here let's just say v if v show, it's fine. Only show this if not subscribed or subscribed locally. I think that's correct. Let's see. Let's check out our state here. All right, so we got subscribed false, subscribed locally false, subscribed false, subscribed locally false. Let's update this one. This should update to subscribed locally true. All right, subscribed to, subscribed locally true. This one's gone. Which is that subscribed locally true, subscribed locally false. Okay, so this must be, this is the bottom one. Okay, so that deleted the form, but we still have this interested subscribe using this form that doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and move some stuff. So I think we can just wrap this up in a p tag, and it'll inherit my markdown styles and move that basically right here. So let's just see what we got. Just keep on signing up. Okay, so we're subscribed there. Get out of here. And now that's gone. So that's basically exactly what I wanted in that case. Let's see what happens if we subscribe at the bottom. Okay, we subscribe at the bottom. We get the confirmation message, which I think is fair. And then up here, we get the confirmation message too. So it's tricky to say, like, is this good or should we just delete this whole thing? Like, I kind of wonder, what does that look like? If I just take this and I just go, see ya, You know, is that okay? Is that like a better look? It's hard to say because I feel like I would want to adjust this bottom padding too, which is sort of weird. So maybe that's a better way to go, is just keep that message there for now. Okay, cool. Got 15 minutes left. Trying to think what's a good thing to do in 15 minutes. Let's see what we can do to work on making this like a renderless component. Okay, so the way that it's going to have to work in general is this is going to be a slot that we pass in to the component. And we're going to have to make sure that we destructure some stuff, right? So in general, this is the structure. We're going to have a slot that gets passed through, and we're going to basically pass to this slot anything that it needs. So maybe we can just try doing that like piece by piece. I think we should start by probably commenting this one out so we can just work on one without seeing errors because we haven't updated the other one to match. So instead of a template now, this is going to have a render function. And it's going to return this .scoped slots.default, and then we're going to pass through any props. So if we say foo bar, and then up here, we destructure foo, and we put an h1 that just renders foo, and make sure that we escape this since we're in like blade land. Then in theory, we should see like some disgusting thing. Can I read property type of undefined? Oh, inline template. We got to remove the inline template tag since we're using a render function now. Now we're going to get a bunch of other things about things that aren't defined, right? But we're actually getting this bar thing showing up now. So in general, this is working. So why don't we start by just looking through these errors and turning these all into slot props that we pass through. Okay, so the first one is ConvertKit ID. So let's pass through ConvertKit ID, this.ConvertKit ID. Now some of this seems like redundant because we're accepting it as a prop and then re-exposing it through the slot scope. So there's no real need to do that, right? Like we could technically just reference the ConvertKit ID that we already have. But I still like this as a pattern in general, because there's certainly going to be situations where you pass a prop into a component, the component maybe modifies that prop in some way and then passes it back to you. So I think it makes sense as sort of a best practice to have the data flow into the component and then back out through the slot scope as just sort of a standard way of handling this stuff. So let's see if we can get rid of that error. ConvertKit, Jesus Christ. If only I could just ConvertKit ID. Yep. Thank you. Okay, foo is undefined. That's fine. We actually don't even want that. Okay, email. Property method email is not defined. Okay, so the email one is actually interesting because it is a vModel binding, right? So there's two approaches to handling this. One, we can pass through a listener that person needs to bind to their input, as well as a value. But I found another way that you can do this that actually works as long as you're careful about making sure that you are referencing things properly. Now, I'll show you how it works, but it kind of feels like some weird Angular 1 stuff that kind of bugged me. But basically, if we pass through like a models object and say that the vModel for this person's input field should be this.email, then up here, as long as we destructure out models and then reference models.input, this will work. Now, it won't work if we passed through just input. It's one of those weird things where you need that parent object so that it's using the same instance and actually mutating the thing. There's still a typo somewhere. Where did I make another typo? God, Jesus Louises. Okay, so just for shits and giggles, let's make sure that this binding is still working. So it's not. Okay. So maybe I was wrong about how that worked. I swear that I made that work once, but I still kind of decided it was a bad idea because it just seemed a little bit too fragile. So we extract models. VModel is going to be models.input. We're passing back models. Input is this .email. Okay, we'll do it a different way. We'll say input events. We're going to want to listen to the input event. And we're going to want to say this dot email equals e.target.value. And then we're also going to want to pass through input attributes. We're going to want to say that the value attribute should be this dot email. Kind of going for a memory here because these are kind of tricky to wire up sometimes. So instead of models, we're going to want to extract input binding or input events and input adders. And then on the input, we're going to have to do v_on equals input events. So you have to just kind of blindly applying any events that we need to be listening to and blindly applying any attributes that we want to bind. If we did this right, this should be working now. Okay, so we got email. Okay, so you can see that that's synchronized now, but we have 102 console errors. Okay, so we still have a bunch of other stuff to replace. Okay, so the next one is working. So let's just pass that through. And we can just do this not working. And the other one was error. Start error. We're going to want to pass through subscribed. This not subscribed. So this is kind of like a lazy sort of sloppy way of doing this. All I really want to do is get this sort of working. So we're going to pass through like everything with direct references the way that you normally would. And then what I would probably do after that is I would look for opportunities to sort of simplify the API that we're exposing through this slot scope, because some of this stuff is like a little bit too low level maybe. So let's just see if that's we're going to want to pull all these out. Error, subscribed locally. Working. Okay, property method submit is not defined. So we're going to want to make sure that we pass through the submit action too. So this is definitely a kind of a gnarly one. And there's other ways that we could solve this problem too, which might be worth kind of actually talking about. So maybe let's just get this working, and then I'll show you like another thing that you can do with these kind of renderless components. That's kind of nice. Okay, so that worked. Now, if we wanted to, we can kind of look at this and see like there's stuff that you want to show if you're subscribed. There's stuff that you want to show if you're not subscribed, right? I'm not sure if this is the best refactoring in this case because of how this one needs to work, where there's like more complex logic around whether it should be shown. But just like as an example, there's two ways that you could do this, right? We could either pass through this state and make it the consumer's choice to decide how to render in reaction to that state. Or we could make this like two separate slots. So for example, we could cut this out and instead of making this V show like not subscribed or whatever, we could put this up here, and we could make this slot equals subscribed, right? So only show this when we're subscribed, and this slot could be, you know, unsubscribed isn't the right word, but like not subscribed or whatever. And then in the component, we could conditionally render different slots. So you see where we have this render function that's always returning the default scope slot. We could do if this dot subscribed return this dot slots, because we don't actually have a scope on this one. Else, actually we don't need an else statement in this case. This could just be not subscribed. Let's just kind of see. Did we do this right? Okay, so we're showing that. If we go to our root and we just change this to be true, then we get an error. Multiple root nodes returned from render function. Render function should return a single root node. Okay, so that's because this is an array. So we can change this to 0 if we know that we're only passing in one element. So if we head over here, head to the root, change subscribed to true, you know, and that's going to show that. If it's false, it shows that. So that's like another way that you can use render functions to sort of conditionally render different slots with different props instead of putting all that logic on the consumer. I think personally I prefer to give that control to the user instead. So let's just revert this back to what we had before. And I think like I'm actually kind of fine with this in hindsight. So I don't have time to go and do this same refactoring with the other one, but maybe it's useful to like quickly talk about this approach versus like the inline template approach. So we didn't really gain a lot, right, by doing this using like scoped slots instead of inline template. I would say that the benefits to this approach versus using inline template, in this case, it doesn't really matter. But for a while, before Vue 2 came out, inline template was actually removed as a feature from Vue. Like Evan removed it because he thought it was like not really a good idea, and the only reason it stayed is because a bunch of folks in the Laravel community sort of complained because a lot of us do these server-side rendered things, and inline template was useful in a lot of cases. So he decided to keep it around. The problem with inline template is, if I'm not mistaken, if you're using inline template, it forces you to use the Vue build that includes the template compiler, which means you have to use like the bigger Vue build, right? And normally if you're working with like single file Vue components and stuff like that, all of your stuff is getting like compiled on your sort of build step into render functions. So the JavaScript that you actually have to deliver to the client doesn't need to have any of that compilation stuff. So I feel like there's a benefit to using the scoped slot approach, because I think it can help you avoid having to use that more bloated Vue build. And it also gives you more control over sort of tuning the API that you actually provide to the template. So if you wanted to simplify some of this stuff, you could, and provide like a nicer API in like a kind of a cleaner way, which is kind of cool and a little bit more flexible. And it's just sort of fun because it feels like you're doing this kind of funky callback based sort of high order function component, which kind of feels cool. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's basically all I wanted to go through. I'll probably refactor this one and get this working again as soon as we're done. Actually, you know what? I bet we could do it so quick by just copying this slot scope and basically pasting it in. If we just head over here And uncomment this. Do we have the V show directly on the slot scope here? It looks like we're adding like a... this might work. Sometimes I'm not sure if you can reference this stuff here, but I bet you can. No, it looks like we're getting an error probably. Okay. Oh no, that's to do with inline template. So let's get rid of that again. Okay, so we're getting errors about the V model stuff. So we can just go and quickly copy this stuff here. Seems like it's still working. Okay, so we like refactor this now to use like one renderless component with two different layouts. So again, this layout, you know, looks like this in this card with a stacked form all the time. This layout down here includes this message and has a side-by-side form. So it's kind of nice that we have the ability to sort of control that without having to duplicate the logic. So we were able to kind of do that, kind of remove my dependency on the ConvertKit's actual JavaScript and build the whole thing as a Vue component by just sort of reverse engineering the communication that they were doing. And I think like our solution is a lot cleaner in this case. They probably have to account for people doing stuff in a lot of weird situations and, you know, working with crappy WordPress plugins and a lot of crap like that. But for our case, where we are fortunate enough to be working in like a clean environment where I'm a developer who's comfortable with Vue and we can do this sort of thing, I think we have a nice little solution here. And now it's a lot more flexible. So I think I'm probably going to keep this around so I can reuse it on other stuff, because I have a whole bunch of other pages with these crappy ConvertKit signup forms too. So anyways, I have to record a podcast with Frank, who I saw in the chat in about 15 minutes. So I need to get prepared for that. So hopefully that was enjoyable, and maybe like you picked up a trick or two and thought it was fun to sort of watch along. And I'm going to try to get back into doing these streams a little bit more often. It's fun to just like be faced with some random problem that I want to solve. And this one was sort of a perfect one where, you know, I could have just solved it on my own, but why not do it on a live stream and turn it into something that other people can watch and maybe learn a thing or two from. So, yeah, hopefully this was cool, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.